Your name shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. You may be seated. I think as we hear the word Israel today, we tend to associate it often with a people group. And oftentimes we forget that it's the name of a people group because it was first the name of an individual. It was the name of somebody, of a person in the Old Testament who became the father of this nation. And they call the nation Israel because it is taken from the name of their father. Of course, you know the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau, and Jacob. Abraham was told that he would be a father of nations, but he only had one son, Isaac. So that's not a nation, is it? And then Isaac does a little bit better. He has two sons, Jacob and Esau. Once again, not quite a nation. And then we get to Jacob, who has 12 sons, and I would dare say that's well on the way to being a nation already. But many of us forget that Jacob did not keep the name Jacob. That over time he became renamed. He was renamed by the angel into the name Israel. And this name Israel became something that exhibited the very essence of who he was becoming as a person. A name in ancient Israel wasn't just an identifier, it was indicative of your nature. And so the word Israel is indicative of who Jacob became. It is indicative of the life of the people of Israel. And it is indicative also, I think, of us, the church, the new Israel. And so I think it would behoove us today to find out what it is that our name means. What is the marker of us, the church, as a people group? And how can knowing that help us to live more fully into our identity? Well, to answer those questions, I want to begin with this one verse. Jacob has this battle as he's waiting to come back home into his homeland. And while he's waiting and worrying, he has this sort of a fight with an angel that comes to him. And at the end, he won't let the angel go until he's blessed. And then finally the angel says this to Jacob. He says, "Your name shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with man, and have prevailed." This is a very meaningful moment for Jacob. And the reason is because of the person that he had been for his entire life. The word Jacob means trickster. And I think that's very indicative of who Jacob was as a person. Because throughout his whole entire life, he had tricked his brother out of his birthright. He had tricked his father into giving the wrong blessing. He tricked his mother. He tricked his father-in-law. His whole life was tricking and tricking and tricking so that he himself could receive personal gain. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not exactly the type of person that I would want to associate with. And I think that Jacob realizes this. This story is really about Jacob's past life kind of catching up with him. I'm not sure about you, but if I knew of someone like Jacob and he had tricked me out of so much stuff as Esau had been tricked out of, I'd probably want to punch him in the face. And that's precisely what Jacob was afraid of. Here's Jacob coming back home. Excuse me. And here comes Esau with 400 men. And what's Jacob thinking? He's thinking of all those things of which he'd robbed his brother. And he's thinking that he's about to get his comeuppance. So what is so important about this, about Jacob being renamed, is it's indicative of him leaving his former life behind and becoming something new. And what is it that he's about to become? Israel. Do you know what Israel means if it's translated from Hebrew? It means the one who struggles with God. Jacob goes from being the trickster to to becoming the one who struggles with God. Now, I think we have a problem in modern Christianity, and that problem is that struggle has become a bad word. We see this all over the place. I'm sure we all get these little prayer requests that say, so-and-so is struggling with their faith. They're struggling with God. Please pray for them. And we treat struggle as if it's some sort of a stigma, as if it's a bad thing. But I think what we can learn from this verse is that struggle is precisely what we all ought to be about. Without struggling with God, we will never come out to become a new person. As a matter of fact, it's precisely because of the struggle that we are being transformed and renewed into new individuals, so that we can leave the former life behind and become something that we've never been before. I remember when I went to my first confession, I went to my confessor and I confessed all these things, and the terminology that I used was this. I said, I'm struggling with this thing, I'm struggling with that thing, I'm struggling with this other thing. And do you know what his response to me was? He said, good. He said, I'm glad you're struggling. And I said, what do you mean you're glad that I'm struggling with all these different things? And he said, would you rather just be giving into it? And at that point I realized what he was saying, that the struggle was a good thing, because the struggle is to not give in to the bad. The struggle is to push back against your old self, into like a butterfly coming out of the cocoon, emerge something new and beautiful and wonderful. But without the struggle, it doesn't happen. So the first thing that I want us to realize today is that the struggle is good. The struggle is meaningful. The struggle is what makes us the people of God. Now, secondly, what do we do? Let me go back to this verse real quick. It says, we came to your brother Esau. This is his, he kind of sent out some spies ahead of time to see what he was walking into, and they came back with this report. We came to your brother Esau, and he's coming to meet you. Great, sounds good, right? And 400 men with him. Okay, doesn't sound quite as good. And then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Now, it's this last little bit that I want to kind of stick with. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. And maybe for good reason. Let's say you tricked someone out of their inheritance, and now you find out they're coming at you with 400 men. You're probably not going to feel very comforted by that news, are you? But I think it says a lot about Jacob's inner state at the moment. Have you ever met someone who's just kind of afraid of change? They always regret that the past is no longer present. And they always wish they could go back to the good old days. And when they think about things changing in the future, they just can't imagine how it could possibly be good. We're all that way, right? We all sort of struggle with change. We miss the past, and we're kind of scared of the future. It's all dark, and no one knows exactly what might happen this way or that. But I think as we take Jacob's story on further, and as we see it unfold, we begin to realize that fear was unnecessary. That fear could have been changed for confidence, and it could have turned out very much the same sort of way. We all often tend to be scared of change because we think of change as leaving something that we love behind. And once it ends up in the past, it's entirely inaccessible, never to be reached again. And we feel like there's this separation that can never be bridged. And I think that the problem here is the way that we view the past, as if it's something that's separate from ourselves. And I think Jacob learns a new lesson here, that the past is not separate and inaccessible. Rather, the past and the struggles that we go through in life, both good and bad, instead become a part of us. They're not inaccessible and distant. Instead, they're part of who you are. They're part of what you've become. And they're part of what you will be. And that's a good thing. Think of a tree, my friends. You know, you can go out to a tree and you can cut it in half. You can cut a cross-section. And right there within that tree is its entire history. You can go there and you can count its age by counting its rings. And if you know how to read these rings, you can say, okay, in this year, it had a bad year. There was a drought. And then in this next year, there was a fire. But then this next year was a year of plenty. And all of that entire history of the tree isn't something that's separate from the tree and inaccessible. Rather, it's something that becomes the very life of the tree itself. My friends, do you know what happens to a hollowed out tree? A hollowed out tree is a tree that is sick. It is a tree that is weak. It is a tree that can fall over from any old wind that comes along and push it down. But a tree that is solid, a tree that lives through its history and allows its history to become a part of itself instead of something that's separate from it, is a tree that is healthy and that is strong and that can live into old age. And then after its own life can contribute to the making of wardrobes and cabinets and houses and all sorts of things. A tree that is solid and connected to its history is a tree that has a very meaningful existence. And we can be the same way too, my friends. We don't have to be scared of change. We don't have to regret the past. And we don't have to fear the future, because through the struggles of life, we become stronger. Through the struggles of life, we become something more sure and secure and confident. Because of the struggles of life, we're changed from Jacob's into Israel's. And so we've learned that struggle is good, and we've learned that struggle is precisely what makes us who we are. And now finally I want to look at this very last verse. It says, so Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Now I think this is a beautiful verse. First of all, because of this, I have seen God face to face. Now this is a really important phrase here. The words face to face with God only apply to a very select few Old Testament characters. So first of all, you have Jacob here, right? You also have Moses, of whom it is said that he saw God face to face. And even, for instance, Elijah, when he went out to see God on the mountain, he covered his face so as to not look upon the face of God. What this indicates, first of all, to me, is a degree of intimacy. Am I correct? If you are face to face with somebody, that's an intimate position in which to be. And so I think that the first lesson that we can take from this is that through his struggle, Jacob not only developed strength and a new identity, but through his struggle, he also experienced intimacy with God. And I think that's important, because it gives us another layer of something to look forward to through the struggles of life. That struggle doesn't just have to be there to be something to beat us down and to hollow us out, but that struggle becomes a means of communion with God himself. And I think that there's a reason for this, my friends, and that reason is the cross of Christ. Jesus Christ, who for eternity is in intimacy with the Father, face to face, as St. John says in John chapter 1. Jesus Christ, in this intimacy with the Father, comes into the world and takes on our human experience, our human flesh, our human nature. And in that experience, he suffers. Jesus Christ, God himself, in the human experience, struggled our struggles. And he himself suffered and was crucified. And because Jesus Christ had his cross in our flesh, when we experience our crosses, we can find him there too. Each of us have crosses in our own life, do we not? These sufferings and these struggles and these difficulties aren't just there to turn us into new people and to make us stronger, but they also become a means of communing with God himself, who also deigned to suffer in our place. Are you experiencing a cross in life right now? Begin to look for Jesus Christ hanging upon that cross. Because when we find Jesus hanging on our cross, by the wood of that cross, he gives solidity to our tree. He keeps us from being hollowed out. By joining ourselves to Christ on our crosses, he redeems that suffering, and he redeems that struggle, and he guarantees us of a resurrection on the other side. And that, my friends, is the beauty of the Christian life. And so these three things define us as the new Israel, as the church. First of all, it is a good thing to struggle. We are to be marked as people who struggle with God. Secondly, through these struggles, we develop a new identity, become a new person, and gain strength through them that will last into all eternity. And finally, through these struggles, we can develop an intimacy with God himself, and we can find those very sufferings and strugglings redeemed into something new and into something beautiful on the other side. And because of these realities, we can hear the angel of the Lord say to us as well, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel." In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.